8-year-old triplets meet a stranger at their mom's grave, then realize who he really is. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now enjoy this unforgettable journey of hidden truths, second chances, and the family that fate almost kept apart. The wind that morning carried something different, a tune barely audible like a whisper of a song half remembered. It wove through the streets of Maple Glen, a small coastal town known more for its quiet than for mysteries. But to the three girls huddled beneath the overhang outside Birchwood Elementary, the wind felt like a signal. Nina pressed her cheek against the cold brick wall, peering around the corner toward the street. "He's late again," she muttered, clutching the tiny box in her coat pocket. Beside her, Maddie bounced on her toes, her knitted hat slipping to one side. "Maybe he's not coming." "Maybe he said Josie, the oldest, by 4 minutes. She pulled her coat tighter, the hem of her skirt damp from the snowmelt. "He always comes on Wednesdays." Their eyes locked on the narrow alleyway across from the school where an old man with a violin case sometimes sat on a bench beneath the cracked street lamp. He never played it, just rested the case on his knees and hummed. Always the same tune. Always alone. But today he didn't come. Instead, the wind shifted again and Nina's fingers tightened around the music box in her pocket. It had arrived the day of their mother's funeral. Not a letter, not a photograph. Just a small cherrywood box with the initials AD carved on top. Their mother's initials. No note. No return address. Just the box left on the porch like a secret someone wanted forgotten. It wasn't until 3 days later in the silence of their shared bedroom that Nina dared open it. Inside, a tarnished ballerina turned slowly to a haunting melody. Not the cheerful lullaby they'd expected, but something older. The kind of tune that felt carved from memory with deep longing chords and a sadness that reached into their chests. Beneath the velvet lining, Josie found something stranger, a scrap of parchment old and yellowed with a line written in swirling script. She danced to this in Paris. Find the man who played it. That was the moment everything changed. They didn't show it to Aunt Margaret. Not yet. The woman meant well, but grief had folded her into herself. She cooked, cleaned, organized, and cried silently in the laundry room. Anything strange, anything that hinted at the unknown was likely to be brushed off as nonsense, so the triplets formed a pact, the Wednesday watch. Now every week they watched for clues. They kept notes in Maddie's notebook labeled, "The Case of the Man Who Wasn't There." They scanned the streets for anything out of place. They whispered theories beneath the cafeteria table. The music box became their compass, guiding them towards something that felt impossibly big and impossibly close. This Wednesday, though, something shifted. As they walked home through slushy sidewalks and brittle snowbanks, Josie was quiet. Too quiet. She kept touching the corner of her backpack where she'd tucked the parchment. Nina walked in the middle fingers balled in her pockets. Maddie skipped ahead, twirling her arms like wings, but even she glanced back more often than usual. At the corner of Winslow Street, Josie stopped. "Let's take the long way," she said. "The long way has that mean dog," Maddie protested. "We need to check the bookstore again," Josie said. "You think he might be there?" Nina asked. Josie nodded. "Or someone who knows the song." Their mother had worked part-time at the bookstore Whistler's Shelf. A cozy shop with velvet armchairs, used poetry, and a piano in the back that no one played anymore. The girls knew it like they knew each other's freckles. It smelled like old pages and peppermint tea, and sometimes in the quiet they swore they could still hear their mother humming down the aisles. Inside, the bell jingled above the door, and Mrs. Carter looked up from behind a pile of hardcovers. "Hello, girls," she said gently. Her voice had taken on a permanent softness since the funeral. "Looking for something in particular?" Sheet music, Josie said quickly. "Old stuff." Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow but waved them toward the back. Maddie wandered to the children's corner, thumbing through a book of illustrated myths. Josie and Nina rifled through a dusty drawer marked Antique Compositions. Most were warped or smudged, their covers flaking at the corners. Then Nina froze. "Joe, this one." She held up a single sheet. It was parchment thin with the title La Valse de l'Absinthe scrawled at the top. No composer listed. Just measures of elegant winding notes that matched the tune from the music box exactly. Josie took the sheet and walked straight to the counter, pulling a crumpled $5 bill from her snow boot. Mrs. Carter looked at the title and went pale. "Where did you find this?" "It was in Mom's things," Josie said. "Do you know it?" Mrs. Carter's lips parted, then closed. "Not well. But I know someone who might." 10 minutes later, the girls stood outside the old chapel on Eider Lane, staring at the rusted iron gate that hadn't swung open in years. "He won't talk to us," Maddie whispered. "He might," Josie replied. "He knew Mom." Simon Delacroix opened the door. He was tall and wiry with white hair like an unspooled violin bow and eyes that had seen too much. He looked down at them in silence. "You're Simon Delacroix, right?" Josie said. "Our mom, Amelia, she played piano here." Simon blinked. "You're her girls." "You knew her?" Nina asked, breathless. "I played with her," he said softly, before she stopped dancing. Josie held up the music sheet. "Do you know this song?" His eyes clouded. He reached for the page with trembling fingers. "I wrote this," he murmured. The girls froze. "Do you know who gave her the music box?" Nina asked. Simon's gaze lifted something awakening behind his eyes. "No," he said slowly, "but I know who used to play this. In Paris." Maddie leaned in. Who Simon knelt looking at each of them in turn. A man who broke Amelia's heart. A man named Elias Monroe. Josie felt the name land in her chest like a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. A name that didn't feel foreign. A name that might fill the blank their mother had left behind. Simon stood dusted off his coat. "Come in," he said. "There's more you should see." Simon Delacroix's chapel wasn't like any place the girls had ever been. It wasn't just old, it was tired. The kind of tired that seeped into the walls and whispered through the faded hymns tucked behind the organ. Dust danced in the high shafts of light that streamed through stained glass windows, and under the air was a faint scent of lavender and something sharper, cologne maybe, or thyme. He led them down a narrow hallway, his steps echoing off the wooden floorboards. At the end of the hall was a room that must once have been a practice space. A grand piano sat against the wall, draped in a pale linen sheet, like an instrument in mourning. Simon peeled back the cover and rested his hand on the keys. He didn't play. Not yet. "Your mother had hands like a composer," he said. "Not a pianist, not exactly. She didn't just play, she told stories." Nina stepped closer. "Did she write this song?" Simon shook his head slowly. "She called it their song. Said it came from someone she met long ago, someone she danced with once in Paris. That tune lived inside her. When she played it, she was somewhere else entirely." Josie bit her lip. Why did she stop? Simon's eyes lowered. Because the man never came back. A chill rippled through the room, and for a moment none of the girls spoke. Maddie reached out and gently touched the top of the piano. "He sent the music box," she whispered. Simon tilted his head. "Then maybe he's trying to come back now." He reached under the bench and retrieved a worn folder. Inside were old photographs and yellowed programs, recitals, gala evenings, a torn ticket from a place called L'Éclat in Paris. In one photo, a woman with wild curls sat at a piano, her fingers frozen mid-motion, her expression one of fierce concentration. Josie stared at it. It was their mother, just younger, brighter, with something unnameable in her eyes. But beside her, half turned to the camera, was a man. He wore a white button-down rolled to the elbows and a narrow black tie. His face was obscured, his head bent toward the piano. But Josie noticed the detail immediately, a silver ring on the little finger of his left hand. The same ring they'd glimpsed on the violin case man in the alley. "That's him," she said, pointing. Simon's eyes narrowed. "Then he's here." Nina stepped forward. "Do you know his name?" Simon hesitated. "Only the first. Elias." Maddie's notebook came out instantly. She scribbled down the name and circled it 3 times. Josie turned to Simon. If he's back? Do you think he knows about us? Simon didn't answer right away. Instead, he laid a gentle hand on the piano keys and played the opening line of La Valse de l'Absente. Just once. Just enough for the room to remember. Music has a way of finding its way home, he said. The rain came down harder the next afternoon, transforming Elmbridge into a patchwork of puddles and glistening streets. From the attic window, Maddie watched rivulets slither down the glass, her breath fogging the edges. Nina sat cross-legged beside her, flipping through the pages of the ledger they'd found in the hollow of the music box. Josie had commandeered the flashlight, shining it dramatically under her chin like a campfire ghost. This has to mean something, Maddie murmured, tapping the pressed sheet of parchment that had fallen loose from the back cover. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even written in full sentences, just short notations. A list, almost. Fifth Ave Bookshop. Wed, 10:30 a.m. Bluebell Cafe. Ask for Grace. Parcel Locker. Key, Demshorn 18. Return before snow. Adeline knows. Josie leaned in. Who's Adeline? Sounds like a spy? Nina whispered, eyes wide with theatrical awe. No, Maddie said, her voice steady. She's real. Remember the envelope that fell out from the box? The one with the sketch of the old woman. Josie grabbed the crumpled paper and unrolled it carefully. A pencil drawing, rough but tender, showed a woman sitting beneath a tree, her hair caught up in a thick braid. At the bottom, in a neat looping hand, was the name Adeline. For everything you gave me. Nina squinted. Is it a thank you note or a goodbye? They didn't have answers, but they had momentum. By dinner time, the girls had worked themselves into a quiet frenzy, tiptoeing through the house like operatives on a mission. The music box, the parchment, the etched names, they weren't coincidences. Their mother had always said there were no such things as coincidences, only stories waiting to be finished. The next morning brought sun-brittle and brief between sallow clouds. Aunt Lillian made them pancakes with cinnamon and clove, humming softly to the oldies on the radio. She didn't notice when Maddie slipped the music box into her backpack, or when Nina wrapped the parchment in a sandwich bag and tucked it into her jacket. Josie, always the decoy, chatted Lillian's ear off about getting a library card. By noon they had made it 2 blocks to the corner of Sycamore and Elm. That's where the first strange thing happened. A man stepped out of the antique shop opposite the post office. He wore a heavy wool coat, the color of slate, a scarf tucked tight under his chin, and gloves that looked soft enough to be expensive. His hair was dark, thick, and swept back with a few gray threads near the temples. He didn't look like a townie, or even someone from the nearby city. He looked like someone who didn't belong, and yet something about him pulled at them. Josie froze mid-step. Maddie stopped breathing. Nina took a step back behind the post. He didn't see them. Or maybe he did and pretended not to. He crossed the street, walking with a slow, deliberate pace, not like someone rushing errands, but like someone absorbing the world. In his hand he carried a small velvet pouch. He turned into the alley between Bluebell Cafe and the library, vanishing from view. The cafe, Maddie said. It was on the list. Josie bolted forward. "Let's go," Nina asked, still glued to the ground, but Maddie was already moving. They didn't stop until they reached the mouth of the alley, hearts thudding against their ribs. But when they turned the corner, the alley was empty. No man, no pouch, just a single silver coin lying on the cobblestones. Josie scooped it up. "It's not American," she said. "What's a florin?" Maddie didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the cafe window just ahead, where an older woman with silver hair was wiping down a counter. Through the glass, a name tag caught the light. Grace. Bluebell Cafe. Ask for Grace. Maddie pushed open the door, the bell tinkling like a signal. Grace looked up. "Well now," she said with a kind smile. "You girls look like you're hunting ghosts." Maddie stepped forward, heart racing. "Actually, we're looking for someone named Adeline, or maybe Grace knows her." Grace blinked, then slowly set the cloth aside. "I haven't heard that name in a long time," she said softly. "But come in and tell me everything." Grace didn't ask many questions at first. She simply brought them warm cocoa and mismatched mugs, blue for Maddie, green for Nina, yellow for Josie, and set down a plate of lemon biscuits that tasted like something from long ago. The cafe was nearly empty. Just the low hum of a dishwasher in the back and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine made it feel like the girls had slipped into a secret world. Maddie spoke first. "Do you know someone named Adeline?" Grace sat across from them, folding her hands. Her fingers were knotted and elegant, the kind that spoke of decades of kneading dough and buttoning coats for people she'd loved and lost. She blinked once slowly. "I knew an Adeline once," she said at last. "She wasn't from here, not originally. She arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a smile that hid everything she didn't say." Josie leaned in. "Was she kind?" Grace smiled faintly. "Kind, yes. Brave, too. And sad. But she never let it show, not even when the leaves fell and no one came looking for her." "Did she have a son?" Nina asked. Grace's mouth twitched just slightly. "She did." That was when Maddie pulled the parchment from her coat, smoothing it out carefully. "We found this in something of our mom's. A box. It had this list, and your name. You were the only one we could find." Grace scanned the list, her expression growing distant. "This handwriting," she murmured, tracing the word Adeline with the edge of her fingernail. It was hers. For a long moment, no one spoke. Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. "She left a long time ago, said she had to fix something before it got lost forever. But she never came back." The girls exchanged a look. "She had a son," Maddie repeated. "Do you know his name?" Grace's eyes went to the window. The rain had returned quiet and cold, tracing slow trails down the glass. "He came here once. Just once. I don't think she ever knew." "What was his name?" Nina pressed gently. Grace hesitated. Then Elijah. "Elijah Thorne." Josie gasped. "That's the name on the coin," Maddie whispered. "The initials E.T. It wasn't just a random mark." Grace stood suddenly, moving to the counter. She rummaged through a drawer and returned with a tiny faded photograph. In it stood a boy, no older than 16, with dark hair, pale skin, and a wild, lonely look in his eyes. "She carried this for years," Grace said. Said it reminded her why she stayed strong. Maddie stared at the picture. Her heartbeat slowed. The man in the alley had the same hair, the same eyes. "We saw him yesterday," she said quietly. "At the cemetery." Grace nodded, but her face had grown solemn. "If Elijah is back, he's not just passing through." "Then what's he doing?" Josie asked. Grace met their eyes. "He's searching too." Elijah stood beneath the skeletal branches of the cemetery's oldest oak, his collar turned up against the wind. He hadn't meant to stop again, hadn't planned to, but his feet had carried him back to the same patch of earth where her name was carved in stone. Adeline Thorne, beloved daughter, sister, and mother, 1978, 2023. Your light remains. He closed his eyes. He had never seen the girls before that day, and yet something in his chest had cracked wide open the moment they turned their faces toward him. 3 mirrors of a life he had buried, one he had walked away from long before it became a story worth telling. He hadn't meant to look at them too long, but they had stared back, and for one frightening, infinite moment, Elijah had seen himself reflected in their eyes. Same dimples, same chin, Adeline's nose. Back at the boarding house, his room was small and plain. A single chair, a desk, and a bed too stiff for dreams. But he didn't sleep anyway. He spent his nights sitting at the desk, a single lamp burning low, staring at the wooden music box he hadn't opened in 20 years. It was hers. He had found it in a parcel waiting for him when he returned to the States, tucked behind an envelope from a lawyer and a folded newspaper clipping that told him his mother was gone. She had left it for him. Inside was the music box, a stack of old photographs, and a letter written in her hand. "Elijah, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye. I've made many choices in my life. Some I'm proud of. Some I still carry. You are the choice I never regretted. If you ever come back, Please forgive me for the silences. I always hoped you would find what you were searching for, even if it wasn't me." He read it a dozen times before he dared touch the latch on the music box. It creaked open. The tune was the same lullaby she had hummed when he was little, a French melody delicate and haunting. Inside was a photograph of a woman and 3 girls all laughing on a summer lawn. The woman was not Adeline, not exactly. Her hair was shorter, her face older, but her smile hadn't changed. She had never looked at him that way, not since he was 12. He turned the picture over. "My reasons, in case you ever wondered." That was the night he began walking the city, not for the rhythm of the pavement, not for the cold, but for signs. And that was when he saw them again. Outside the bakery, near the bookstore, across the street from a school, the girls, Maddie, Nina, Josie. He didn't know their names yet, but he memorized their movements. They always moved together like starlings in flight. One led, one hesitated, one made up the space between. Elijah had learned to be invisible. He had spent the better part of 10 years mastering the art of presence without impact, but when the girls walked by, he found himself hesitating, watching, wanting. And then one evening, as the sky turned the color of slate, one of them spotted him, the bold one, the leader, Maddie. She stared. He ducked into the alley, heart-pounding, breath caught like it had nowhere to go. He didn't know what he was doing. He hadn't even made a plan. The next morning a letter arrived. He didn't know how it found him. It was scrawled on lined paper, the writing uncertain. The envelope had no return address. But the message was clear. "We think we might know you. If you want to know us too, meet us at the place with the music box." That night he walked the long way to Grace's cafe. She was waiting at the counter with 2 mugs of coffee and a third of cocoa. "They found you, didn't they?" she asked, not looking up. Elijah nodded slowly. "They don't know who I am. They will." He sat at the window table, the old wood creaking beneath him. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and rain. Across the room the girls appeared silent and serious. Maddie had a notebook. Nina held a folded paper. Josie clutched something small in her fist. He hadn't spoken to children in years. Maddie sat first. "You're Elijah Thorne." He blinked. "How did you—" "We found your name," Nina said in something that used to be our mom's. Josie opened her hand. A coin rested in her palm, worn smooth, but his initials still faintly visible. "I dropped that the night I—" He trailed off. "You were at the cemetery," Maddie said. Why he met her eyes? Because she was my mother. The silence that followed was thick, too heavy for this room for this moment. "She never told us anything," Nina said finally. "Not about you. Not about the past." "She was like that," Elijah murmured. "She wanted to protect people, even if it meant cutting pieces of herself out of the story." Josie leaned forward. "Did you love her?" The question burned. He nodded. "I still do." The girls exchanged a glance. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was something else, curiosity wrapped in guarded hope. "We don't know what this means," Maddie said. "Not yet." "I don't either," Elijah admitted. "But I want to find out." That's when Grace returned with a second cocoa and a plate of biscuits. "I told them what I knew," she said softly. "But that won't be enough. You've got to do the rest." He looked at the girls. "Would it be all right if I came back?" They were quiet for a moment. Then Josie nodded. "If you bring more biscuits." And just like that, something small like the catch of a latch clicked into place. The rain had stopped by the time the girls and Elijah parted ways outside Grace's cafe, but the sky remained wrapped in low-hanging clouds, casting a silver sheen over the cracked pavement. The kind of sky that made shadows softer and silences deeper. Elijah lingered near the entrance after they left, his hand resting on the doorframe. Grace watched him through the glass as she wiped the counter. When he didn't move, she stepped outside, wrapping her sweater tighter around her arms. She said your name once she said not looking at him. A long time ago, the night she told me she'd made a choice she could never undo. Elijah turned to her, a question in his eyes. I asked her if she still loved you, Grace went on. She didn't answer, but she kept a picture of you, tucked behind her mirror. It was the only thing she never packed, no matter how many times she moved. He didn't speak. His throat was tight. Grace tilted her head toward the street where the girls had disappeared around the corner. You don't have to be everything. Just don't vanish again. That night, the girls sat on the floor of their shared bedroom, the lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the quilt they used for important conversations. The music box sat between them unopened. They hadn't dared bring it to the cafe. Maddie traced her finger over the lid. He didn't lie. He could have, but he didn't. Nina sat cross-legged, arms around her knees. He said she was his mom. That means he's our uncle, half Uncle Josie mumbled, curled on her side. Or cousin. Or nothing. I don't know. There was a beat of quiet. What if he is something, Maddie whispered. What if he's the piece that was always missing? Nina looked toward the window where the streetlight flickered through the blinds. He didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like part of a story, Josie said sleepily. One mom didn't finish telling. In a boarding house room on the edge of town, Elijah sat at his desk with a blank notebook open in front of him. He stared at the page pen hovering over the paper. For a man who once made a life out of words, he found himself unable to write a single sentence. The music box sat beside him, its lid open just enough to reveal the photograph inside. They looked like her. The fierceness in Maddie's stare, the way Nina tilted her head when she was curious, the quiet warmth in Josie's eyes like a lantern on a stormy night. He reached for the pen. What if this is what I was meant to come back for? He paused, then added, not redemption. Not even forgiveness. Just a chance to love what's still left. As the clock ticked past midnight, both the triplets and Elijah lay in separate rooms staring at different ceilings connected by a thread. Neither of them could name yet, but all of them could feel. Tomorrow they would meet again. And next time, there would be more than questions. There would be a mystery to solve. And maybe, just maybe, a family to build. The following Saturday arrived with a strange sort of electricity in the air, one of those spring mornings that couldn't decide whether to rain or shine. A thin mist clung to the rooftops of Elmbridge as the girls waited on the curb outside Grace's cafe. Bundled in their rain jackets, the music box zipped carefully into Maddie's backpack. They had agreed today was not just about asking questions. Today they were going to start looking for answers. I told Grace we'd be early, Nina said, checking the tiny notebook she now carried everywhere. I brought the sketch of the locket and Josie packed the map. Josie lifted her satchel in reply. I also brought extra pencils and granola bars. Maddie paced like a general before a mission. He'll come. He said he would, and Elijah did. He arrived not in a rush, but as if he'd been walking toward this moment, his whole life collar turned up against the breeze hair still damp from the morning fog. When he saw them, his face lit up in a way that surprised even him. You came back, Maddie said, crossing her arms, but not unkindly. I said I would, he replied, and I brought something. From his coat pocket he pulled out a folded napkin. Inside was a pressed flower white with faint lilac tips. A daisy, Josie whispered. Like the one on the key. Elijah nodded. Same kind. Found it yesterday on the hill behind the church, where she used to sit. Nina added, remembering a distant afternoon, the three of them under a blanket, Mom telling stories of daisies and daydreams. Maddie glanced up at Elijah. You knew that I didn't, he said. I just remembered her liking this kind. When we were young. It wasn't proof, but it was something. Inside the cafe, Grace had already set up a quiet corner for them, 4 chairs, a pot of tea, and 3 bowls of warm soup that she claimed were on the house. Detective work runs better with lentils, she said with a wink. On the table between them lay their tiny trove of clues, the music box, the brass key with the daisy mark, and now the napkin flower Elijah had brought. Nina laid the sketch beside them. So, Elijah said, folding his hands, tell me what you know. The girls took turns speaking, passing the baton without needing to say who should go next. Maddie explained how they'd found the music box tucked into a crack behind the floorboard in Mom's room, sealed in wax paper almost as if hidden. Nina read aloud the tiny inscription inside the box lid, "To E always the melody." Josie unrolled a crayon map they had drawn, marked with places Mom had loved: the bridge in Sycamore Park, the daisies behind the church, the dusty back corner of the Elmbridge Public Library. Elijah leaned in, listening not with polite patience, but with a kind of reverence. She used to hum that tune, he said, pointing to the winding gear in the music box. But only when she was painting. "I haven't heard it in years." "You're in it," Maddie said suddenly. "What in this?" "All of it," she clarified. "You're part of whatever Mom didn't tell us. That's why we're letting you in." Nina nodded. "But only if you help." "I want to," Elijah said, quieter now. "I've spent so long running from the past." "Maybe. It's time I start running toward it." They made their first plan as a team. The girls would follow up at the library, searching the archives for any mentions of the Elmbridge Art Fellowship, an old scholarship program Mom had once received. Elijah, meanwhile, promised to visit the local post office to check if anyone recognized the initials on a decades-old envelope tucked behind the music box's velvet lining, EM. 62 Maple Row. After lunch, they split up 3 girls to the library, 1 man to a long abandoned street with boarded windows and ivy-choked fences. But as it turned out, they wouldn't stay separated for long, because something happened. At the library, Josie tripped over a collapsed box near the local history corner and outspilled a bundle of weathered brochures and sign-in sheets from past community art events. One page, damp and half-torn, bore a list of names under the heading Spring Arts Mentorship Program 2008. Scribbled beside the name, Elena Marsh. Their mother's name was a mentor. Pairing E. Linden. Linden, Nina repeated. That was her last boyfriend before she stopped talking about people. But she never mentioned him being from here, Maddie said. What if they snapped a picture of the page and raced from the building? Meanwhile, Elijah stood in front of a faded sign on Maple Row. House 62 had long since collapsed in on itself. But in the boarded window, a child had once scratched a name, Eli plus M. His breath caught. Someone called his name. Elijah. He turned. 3 rain-jacketed figures came flying toward him down the block, Josie waving her phone like a torch. Linden Nina shouted, "We think he's connected to Mom and to you." For a moment, the street went quiet. Then Elijah said, almost to himself, "He was my brother." "What?" Maddie blinked. "My younger brother, Elijah and Elias. Everyone called us the twins, even though we were 2 years apart." His voice trembled. "He left town the same year your mom did." The girls looked at one another. "We need to find him," Josie said. They had their first real clue, and now they had their first mission. Together. It was just after lunch when Maddie decided they needed to go back to the library. Not for books, not for fun, for a mission. Elijah stood awkwardly in the foyer of the small Elmbridge branch, arms crossed, while the triplets flitted from aisle to aisle with practiced speed. Josie combed through the local newspaper archives with Nina perched at her side, fingers moving across the touchscreen like a pianist at her keys. Maddie, on the other hand, was deep in the card catalog. Not because she didn't know how to use a computer, but because she believed some mysteries like to be solved the old-fashioned way. "They remind me of her," Elijah said quietly, leaning toward the librarian, Mrs. Peretti, who had been eyeing the girls with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "You mean their mother?" she asked. He nodded, his gaze softening as he watched Maddie tiptoe to reach the top drawer of the old filing cabinet. They move with the same kind of focus, like they're looking for answers in the bones of the world. Mrs. Peretti gave a small smile. "They're in here almost every week, usually outsmart me by the time they leave." That one, she pointed toward Nina, once corrected a caption in the town's historical archive. She was 7. Elijah exhaled a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. He hadn't told the girls yet. The truth. Not fully. But he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. "Okay," Maddie said triumphantly, returning with a stack of local magazines and a dusty file labeled Community Projects 2014-2016. We think Mom might have been part of this mentorship program at the Elmbridge Civic Center, she said, flipping it open. It was funded by the town back when they had the grant for creative arts and cultural exchange. Elijah, Nina said, did you ever volunteer for anything like that? He froze. It was like someone had turned a key in his chest. Yes, he said slowly. Not officially. But your mom and I, we were both at the Civic Center a lot that year. I helped coordinate an art exhibit for small business donors. Josie tilted her head. So you did know her? I don't remember her name, he stammered. It was a long time ago. And I was different then. She would have been pregnant, Maddie said bluntly, or close to it. Elijah sat down. The chair creaked beneath him, the weight of their gaze heavier than anything he'd carried in years. Maddie stared at him with eyes that could split stone. Nina's were curious but cautious. Josie's were glassy, like she was trying to read him before deciding what to believe. She had a notebook, Josie said. She used to keep everything in it. Drawings, letters, receipts, ticket stubs, notes from lectures. She let us flip through it once when we asked about where we came from. There were no names. Just a pressed flower and a receipt from a gallery. Elijah looked up. A poppy, he said. Josie froze. You remember, she whispered. I gave it to her, he said, as if the words had been trapped for years. The day she told me she was moving away. She never said why. She just said it was something she had to do on her own. The girls didn't speak. For a few breaths, the only sound in the library was the soft hum of the air conditioner and the turning of a distant page. Why didn't you go after her? Maddie finally asked. I thought she was leaving me, he said, and I was too proud, too scared to ask why. Nina sat beside him. And now, I don't want to be scared anymore. Josie looked down at her hands. Do you think you could help us find out the rest? I'll try, Elijah said. If you'll let me. Maddie didn't answer right away. She pulled out the music box from her backpack and held it out. Then start here. He opened it slowly. The song began soft, hesitant, like a memory almost forgotten. Inside, nestled beneath the mechanics, was a folded slip of paper with a date and time. December 17th, 4 or 0 p.m. Civic Center basement. No signature. Maddie stared at him, arms crossed. You said she was in the mentorship program. Maybe she left this for someone. Nina added, it was hidden under the velvet lining. We had to lift the gear housing to see it. Elijah looked at the girls, then at the music box. I was there that day, he said. There was a winter showcase, a final project from the mentees. I helped set up the lights. Then that's our next lead, Maddie said, eyes gleaming. We go to the Civic Center. We find out what happened. You're grounded, came a voice from behind them. All four turned to see Miss Allen, the girls' guidance counselor, and Elijah's high school classmate standing near the front desk. Maddie blinked. We're not grounded. Miss Allen gave Elijah a dry look. Not yet. But if this becomes a field trip without adult permission, then yes, you will be. Nina groaned. We're not running away. We're solving a mystery. Miss Allen raised an eyebrow. Is that what they told you, Elijah? He rubbed the back of his neck. Actually, I may have helped them plan it. She sighed and shook her head. Then at least let me take you. I'll call your aunt and get her approval. But no more cloak and dagger, you three. You're not secret agents. You're kids. We're both, Josie muttered under her breath. Miss Allen shot her a look, but there was no real fire behind it. Elijah stood. Thank you, he said to Miss Allen. They've got more courage than most adults I know. They got that from their mom, she replied. Now you ready to chase ghosts in a basement? Elijah looked at the girls, at Maddie's fire, Nina's quiet strength, Josie's watchful stillness. I think I already am. Elijah had never been a man of superstition, but as they drove toward the Civic Center with Miss Allen behind the wheel, and the triplets whispering among themselves in the back seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were following a trail laid out by something more than chance. The sky had shifted from slate gray to violet, the winter dusk, descending early and casting long shadows across the windshield. Beside him, Maddie clutched the music box like a relic, her thumb brushing the edge of the hidden note inside. She hadn't spoken much since the library, none of them had, but the silence was thick with meaning. "I remember that showcase," Miss Allen said quietly, eyes on the road. "I was still in college but came home for winter break. My little brother was one of the students in the program. The Civic Center was packed, art displays, music, dance pieces. There was even a girl who did a poetry performance in French." Elijah blinked. French. She was nervous, but passionate. She spoke like the words were sacred. Josie leaned forward. "Mom used to say that too, that words were spells and poetry was a kind of magic. That was her," Elijah said. "I'm sure of it now." They reached the Civic Center just before closing. Miss Allen flashed her school ID and explained the nature of their research project with just enough charm and just enough bluff to earn them 10 minutes in the old archives room in the basement. The place smelled of dust and time-faded papers, aged wood, and something faintly floral like lavender clinging to old carpet. The lights flickered once overhead. Maddie led the way. December 17th. She whispered, scanning the wall of old event flyers and laminated schedules. It would have been 9 years ago exactly next week. Nina pointed. There. They found the flyer, Winter Showcase, December 17th, a celebration of voice and vision. Underneath, handwritten in the corner, special performance, 4:00 p.m. Je t'attends, dans l'hiver, Josie translated softly. I wait for you in winter. Elijah stared at the line, his throat tightening. That was the name of the poem, he said. She read it to me once, months before she left. Maddie turned. So this wasn't just a school project. This was a message. Nina pulled out the music box and opened it again, letting the melody unfurl slowly in the stale air. It wasn't just left for us, she said. It was left for you too. Josie nodded. She knew you might come back someday. Elijah closed his eyes. For a moment, the echo of her voice overlapped with the music, the lilting French, the soft tremor of nerves beneath confidence. She waited, he whispered. All that time, and I didn't even know. Miss Allen stepped forward, her tone unusually gentle. Maybe she wasn't waiting for you to come back, Elijah. Maybe she was waiting for the girls to bring you home. The music box clicked shut. No one said a word, but as the shadows deepened, so did their resolve. Whatever lay ahead, it would not be uncovered alone. They were in this together now, 3 girls and the man whose name they hadn't yet dared to say aloud. The Civic Center was closing, but none of them moved. The dusty room had gone quiet again, save for the hum of old lights and the fading melody still echoing in their bones. Outside, the cold pressed against the windows, but inside something had shifted like the air just before snow. Back in the car, the triplets huddled in the back seat. Miss Allen had promised to drive them home, but Elijah asked to take a detour first. Just one more stop, he said. I think I need to show you something, too. They didn't ask where. Maybe they sensed after everything that the past was steering now. Elijah hadn't been to the storage unit in years. The rental had always been paid on auto debit like so many other parts of his life, but he hadn't set foot inside since the week Claire left. He remembered stacking boxes by flashlight, stuffing years of memory into plastic bins. The unit wasn't large, just 10 by 10, but inside was everything he hadn't known how to carry: handwritten scores, old photos, the sweater she'd left on his chair, and one box sealed and never reopened, labeled letters. He unlocked the unit and lifted the metal door with a groan. The air inside was sharp with paper, ink, and cold vinyl. The triplets stepped in behind him like archaeologists entering a forgotten temple. Nina reached up and touched the box. Are they from her? Elijah nodded, his throat tight. I never read them. I couldn't. Maddie stepped forward. Maybe it's time. He didn't speak, only pulled the box down gently and placed it on a folded table near the entrance. Josie opened it first. Slow, careful fingers peeling back the flaps like the edges of a storybook. Inside, dozens of envelopes, some stamped, some hand-delivered, some tied with blue ribbon. Each bore the same handwriting, soft and looped. Claire's. Elijah picked up the top letter, dated 6 months after she'd left. The ink had faded a little, but her voice was still alive in every word. Dear Eli, I didn't think I'd write again, but something happened today. I heard a song in the market that reminded me of the night you brought me daffodils in November. Remember that you said you'd bought out the last blooms in Manhattan? I know it wasn't about the flowers. It was about the silence you were trying to fill. I saw it in your eyes. I wish I had said something then. I wish I had been braver. I keep wondering if you feel it too, that something's still unfinished between us. I don't want anything from you. But I needed to write. Just once. Just in case. Always Claire. He didn't notice he was crying until Josie reached up to wipe his cheek. They were never sent, he said hoarsely. She left them with a friend. She didn't want to pressure me. I think she was waiting for the right time. Maddie picked up another letter, then another, then she stopped. This one, she said softly, holding out an envelope. It's addressed to us. Elijah took it slowly. The handwriting was the same, but the words on the front hit differently. For Maddie, Nina, and Josie, if you ever find him. He tore the flap carefully. Inside was a single page. The girls leaned in close. My sweet stars. If you're reading this, it means you found the music box. It means the mystery I left you was just strong enough to pull you toward what you were always meant to find. You've probably guessed by now that the man with the kind eyes and messy hair is more than a friend. He was once my whole world before I knew I'd be sharing that world with 3 tiny miracles. I didn't keep you from him out of anger. I did it out of fear that I would lose you both, that I would ask too much of him, that I would be too much. But I want you to know this. He loved music the way I loved you, with a kind of fire that doesn't dim even when buried. If he's standing there now, it means he still does. Ask him about the song he never finished, the one called Winter Waits, and if he doesn't have an answer, forgive him anyway. We all leave unfinished songs behind, but you, my girls, are the ending I never knew I'd get to write, always in the melody, Mom. The silence after the letter was different. It was full, not empty. Nina looked up at Elijah. What's Winter Waits? He let out a breath, half a laugh. It was a piece I started writing when she was pregnant. I never told her I knew. I saw the letter in the trash one morning, a doctor's referral. Maddie's eyes widened. You knew I thought she'd tell me when she was ready. And when she didn't, I thought, maybe she'd made her choice. Josie touched the edge of the envelope. She never stopped choosing you. They stood like that, a circle of people bound by ink and silence and a melody that had waited almost a decade to be heard. Then Elijah turned to the girls. I want to finish the song, he said. For her, Nina asked. He shook his head gently. For all of us. The storage unit sat behind them, now locked again, its contents rearranged, not just physically, but in memory. They hadn't taken the letters with them. Not yet. Elijah had wrapped the box in Claire's old scarf and tucked it back into its shelf like a story waiting to be revisited when the air didn't ache quite so much. Now they were in the diner across the street. Vinyl booths, a jukebox that didn't work, mismatched mugs and waitresses who refilled coffee like it was a reflex. The girls sat in a line on one side of the booth. Elijah sat opposite them, hands wrapped around a steaming mug that hadn't cooled the shaking in his fingers. Maddie stirred her hot chocolate with a spoon, silent. Nina watched people pass through the fogged window. Josie doodled in the margins of a napkin, sketching a figure with a violin beneath a snow-dusted tree. Elijah cleared his throat softly. I didn't think I'd get this far, he said, voice low. I thought, maybe I'd meet you, maybe say something polite, respectful, and then I'd walk away. Why didn't you? Maddie asked, not accusing, just curious. He gave a slow, measured breath. Because I saw Claire in your eyes, not just her face, her wonder, her strength, her way of seeing straight through people. Josie smiled faintly but said nothing. You're not a polite goodbye kind of person, Nina said, almost matter of fact. You're the kind of person who stays up all night fixing a broken key just to see if the sound still works. Elijah blinked, then laughed quietly. You're not wrong. The waitress brought pie without asking. Elijah didn't know how it had ended up on the table, but the girls acted like it was ritual. 4 forks, 1 slice. They broke it into quarters and passed the plate around. No one fought over the last bite. They always saved it for whoever was quietest. Tonight it was Josie. As she chewed, her eyes didn't leave Elijah's. If you write the song for her, can we help? He hesitated. You already have, he said gently. Nina frowned. That doesn't count. Maddie leaned forward. We don't just want to be in your story. We want to build it. That stopped him cold. He had no answer for that, not yet. But something shifted inside him, something that had sat frozen since the day Claire left. A space thawed small and trembling. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something he hadn't shown anyone, a tiny brass charm in the shape of a music box crank. Claire had given it to him the night he first told her he loved her. So you never forget, she'd whispered. He slid it across the table to Josie. You hold this, just until the song's done. She took it with reverent fingers, nodding like she understood something beyond words. Outside, the sky deepened into night, but inside the booth, under cheap lights and cooling cocoa, something unspoken had begun to take root. They weren't done, not even close. They were just tuning up. The next Saturday arrived, cloaked in sunlight and the sound of birds brave enough to return before spring had officially settled. Elijah stood outside the gates of the Starlight Home Community Garden, a place he hadn't known existed until Josie had drawn it from memory. You're early, came a voice behind him. He turned. All 3 girls were there, bundled in mismatched jackets, gloves in hand, cheeks red from the brisk morning walk. Mrs. Alder, the Starlight director, trailed behind with a shopping bag full of seed packets and garden gloves. We're always early, Maddie said. We're used to being the first ones to arrive and the last to leave. That's a good habit, Elijah replied. It's a survival tactic, Nina said, smiling just enough to soften the words. Josie walked past him into the garden, boots crunching on gravel. We brought a trowel, and gloves, and compost. Claire taught us to always bring compost. Elijah followed them through the rusty gate. The community garden was larger than he'd expected, a patchwork of raised beds, climbing trellises, and dormant flower stalks. It was clearly well-loved and equally weather-worn. Some parts bloomed with potential, others looked forgotten. Are we planting something today? He asked, careful not to overstep. No, Maddie said. We're saving something. Nina pointed toward a flower bed overrun with ivy. A small wooden sign lay cracked in 2, half buried in mulch. What remained read Claire's Corner. Elijah stopped. The name hit like a string plucked in the back of his throat. She started this garden bed before she got too sick, Mrs. Alder said, setting down her bags. Said she wanted a place for wildflowers. Said she wanted the girls to know things still grow, even after they're gone. Josie crouched down and started pulling away the ivy with her hands. Elijah joined her, falling into rhythm beside the girls. They worked silently at first, each of them focused. It was the kind of silence that didn't hurt, a silence full of weight and motion and careful fingers moving through the mess. They pulled up invasive weeds, cut away dead stems, unearthed a cracked wind chime shaped like a daisy. Beneath it all, bulbs were pushing through the soil. Daffodils, maybe crocus, or tulips. Claire planted these, Elijah asked. Yeah, Maddie said. She said planting bulbs was an act of hope. He smiled. Sounds like her. Hours passed that way, clearing, digging, rebuilding. Elijah replaced the broken sign with a new one he'd carved the night before. It read, Claire's Corner. Things still grow. He caught the girls watching him when he hammered it into place. Not with suspicion anymore, but with something quieter. Approval, maybe, or permission. Afterward, they sat on the curb sharing apple slices and peanut butter sandwiches from a dented lunchbox. Josie passed him a folded napkin. On it, she'd drawn a tiny version of Claire's Corner wildflowers blooming up from the page. You're part of this now, she said, not looking up. Elijah nodded. Then I'll help take care of it. Nina nudged him gently. You know, if you're serious about writing Claire's song, maybe you should start here. He looked back at the flower bed golden in the afternoon sun with its stubborn green shoots poking from soil she had touched. Yeah, he said. This is where it begins. They didn't call him Dad, not yet. But that day Elijah knew something irreversible had started to bloom, delicate and undeniable. They were beginning to let him in, root by root, petal by petal. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the community garden. The air carried that in-between feeling, no longer winter but not yet warm enough to believe in spring completely. Elijah rubbed the dirt from his palms and leaned back against the edge of the garden bed they'd just revived. A soft thud landed beside him. Josie plopped down, legs crossed, her eyes scanning the work they'd done. You missed a weed, she said, pointing to a stubborn dandelion poking up near the base of the daffodils. Elijah laughed quietly. It's there for character. Maddie and Nina joined them, settling on the grass without a word. They were quiet in that way kids get when something bigger than conversation hangs in the air. Elijah, Maddie said suddenly. Why did you come back? He paused. That wasn't a question to answer lightly. I didn't know I had anything to come back for, he said honestly. Then, I heard your song. I saw you. Nina's brow furrowed. So it's not just about Claire? No, he said, looking each of them in the eye. It's about all of you. Josie leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You're still kind of a mystery, Fair Elijah replied. I've been a mystery to myself for a long time. They fell into another hush, only this time it felt more like reflection than resistance. Josie absent-mindedly traced circles in the dirt with a stick. Nina twisted the edge of her glove around her finger. Maddie watched him closely, measuring his sincerity like a scientist testing a hypothesis. After a moment, Nina spoke. Do you think people can change? Like really change? Elijah considered that. Yes, he said. But not by themselves. They have to choose it, and they need someone who believes they can. Claire believed in people, Josie said quietly. She believed in us, Maddie added. She believed in you too, Nina said. Elijah felt the lump in his throat rise again. He'd spent so many years convincing himself he didn't need to be believed in, that it was easier to live without anyone expecting anything of him. But these girls, Claire's girls, weren't expecting him to be perfect. They were asking him to show up. You don't have to believe in me yet, he said. But if you give me the chance, I'll keep showing up. One garden bed, one afternoon at a time. Maddie gave a small nod, slow but steady. Josie reached into her bag and handed him a folded paper, a sketch of 3 girls standing in front of a man holding a watering can, a heart blooming from the soil between them. Add it to your song, she said. He took it, his throat tightening. Thank you. As they stood to leave, Nina turned back. Do you think we should plant something together next time? Elijah smiled. Yeah, something new. The marble tower loomed above the city like a symbol of everything Elijah once thought he needed to become. Whitmore Capital's headquarters, a 42-story slab of power and polished stone, was wrapped in mirrored glass that reflected the sky, but revealed nothing of what went on inside. He hadn't walked through its doors in almost 2 years. Yet here he was. He wore a suit again, not out of pride, but protection. The fabric felt foreign now, too stiff, too clean, like a costume borrowed from a life he no longer claimed. He stepped through the revolving door. The receptionist's head snapped up. Mr. Whitmore. He paused. That name, his name, no longer settled comfortably on his shoulders. Yes, he said. I have a meeting with Philip Marston. A few minutes later, he was ushered into a corner office that overlooked the river. Philip, his former partner and the firm's acting CEO, sat behind a desk, larger than the kitchen in the Triplets house. Elijah, Philip said, rising to shake his hand. This is a surprise. You got my message, Elijah replied. I did, but I thought you were out for good. What brings you back? I want to sell. Philip blinked. All of it. My shares, my name, my rights to the firm. Philip leaned back. Can I ask why I'm building something else? Something better? The other man laughed softly. Family. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't have to. Philip was already reading it in his face. You know, Philip said, pouring coffee without asking when you left. We thought you'd cracked. Took a sabbatical, vanished to the countryside. We figured you'd come back with a book deal or a beard and some philosophy about being present. But you disappeared completely. I had things to fix, Elijah said simply. And have you? Not yet. But I'm trying. Philip sipped his coffee. There's no rush on this sale, you know. You built this firm. Your father, I'm not him, Elijah cut in. No, Philip said quietly. You're not. They went through the paperwork. Philip offered to have the legal team draft everything by the end of the week. As Elijah left the office, he caught his reflection in the mirrored elevator wall. Suit-tie polished shoes, and realized how little it resembled the man who'd knelt in the garden yesterday beside 3 girls laughing over worms and wildflowers. He rode down in silence, each floor shedding an old version of himself. Outside, the afternoon wind swept through the city, tousling his hair as if reminding him he was still real. He pulled out his phone and texted Nina. Elijah, I think I'm ready to show you something. A minute later, her reply came. Nina, we're at the library, music room. Maddie's got a theory. He smiled. Of course she did. The girls didn't look up when he entered the small side room, tucked between the biographies and the history section. They were gathered around a weathered, upright piano sheet, music strewn across the top like treasure maps. Josie tapped out a tune. Maddie hummed harmony. Nina scribbled lyrics. He leaned against the doorway for a while, just watching. How they fit together. How the space bent gently around their presence. Hey, he said softly. 3 heads turned in unison. Maddie narrowed her eyes. Why are you dressed like a banker? I had some business to finish, he said. But now I'm here, and I brought something. He set the box on the piano bench and opened the lid. Inside, a simple, handcrafted music box. The girls leaned closer. It used to be my mother's, Elijah said. She gave it to me the year she passed. I was your age, maybe younger. I didn't understand what she meant by it then, but I think I do now. He turned the key. The melody was gentle nostalgic, a waltz with a twist of melancholy. Josie's eyes widened. That's the song. Maddie's breath caught. Nina whispered the same melody from the graveyard. Elijah nodded. It plays the song Claire wrote, or at least her version of it. I found the original in an old journal. They stared at him. You knew our mom, Maddie said. He nodded. Yes. You cared about her, Nina added. Yes. Josie's voice was quieter than the others. Then why didn't you come back? The music box wound down. Silence filled the space. Elijah knelt beside the bench. Because I made a mistake. A terrible one. And I didn't know how to fix it. Is it fixed now? Nina asked. He looked up at them, not just as children, but as echoes of the woman he had loved and lost. No, he said, but I want to try. And I was hoping I could start by asking if I could help with your next performance, maybe add an instrument, or some lighting, or just be there, Josie asked. Yes, he said. Just be there. Maddie smiled slowly, the kind of smile that doesn't come easy, but means everything when it does. Okay, she said. And just like that, the door opened a little wider. It started with a letter. The girls had almost forgotten it, tucked into a pocket of Maddie's old blue backpack, between a broken pencil and a granola wrapper. The letter they wrote on a rainy Sunday afternoon with a borrowed pen and too much hope. The one addressed to a man they didn't know yet, sent to a university office in Paris, asking about someone named Claire. They had never expected it to reach anyone, but it had. Now it was back in Maddie's hands, returned by the man they had once only imagined. She spread it on the kitchen table, carefully smoothing the wrinkles from the folded paper. Elijah sat across from her, coffee cooling at his elbow, his eyes flicking not to the words, but to their names scrawled in purple ink along the bottom edge, Maddie, Nina, and Josie. You kept it, he asked softly. We forgot it, she admitted. Then we remembered. Nina leaned on the back of Maddie's chair. We weren't sure what to do with it after we met you, Josie added. It felt weird to keep something that was about finding you after you were already here. They were all gathered in the kitchen of the Whitmore cottage, now Elijah's cottage, he kept reminding himself, with afternoon light streaking through the windows and the soft scent of ginger cookies baking in the oven. Claire's old recipe. The girls had found it written in the margins of a songbook. "I thought maybe I could frame it," Maddie said. "Put it in the music room." Elijah blinked. "You want to keep it?" "Yeah," she said simply. "It's the start of all of this. Even if we didn't know what we were starting." Elijah reached out and gently tapped the paper. "You know, I've never asked. What made you write it?" The girls looked at each other. It wasn't just the music box, Nina said. It was that day, Josie added. "At the graveyard." "You looked like you'd lost something too," Maddie finished. "And you didn't cry. But we knew." There was a long silence. Elijah's throat tightened. "I did cry," he said quietly, "just not there." They nodded like they already knew. The timer dinged on the oven, but none of them moved. Josie stared at him, her voice quiet. "Are you going to tell us now?" He didn't ask what she meant. He rose slowly and disappeared into the hallway, returning with a shoebox wrapped in a silk scarf. Inside were papers, some yellowed with age, others still creased from being opened and reread too often. "This," Elijah said, "was the last letter your mother ever wrote to me." He held it out. Maddie took it, her fingers trembling. The girls gathered around, heads close together as they read. Claire's handwriting curled across the page like music. It spoke of memories, laughter in a park, a song written at midnight, promises they hadn't been brave enough to say out loud. "Then I'm leaving the country. I won't ask you to come with me. I think we made something beautiful, Elijah. Maybe someday it will find you again." They read the final line twice. "I didn't reply," he said hoarsely. "I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't even know she'd left the country. I found the letter years too late." Josie blinked quickly. "So, you didn't leave her. I thought she left me." Maddie bit her lip. "So no one meant to disappear?" "No," he said. "We just got lost." The silence that followed was heavier than before, not cold, but weighted with understanding. Finally, Nina stepped closer. "But you're here now." "Yes, and you stayed." "Yes." She nodded. Then she reached forward and slid something else out of the shoebox, a stack of letters in Claire's handwriting tied with twine. "Can we read these too, if you want?" Elijah said. "Or I could read them to you. One each night." Maddie smiled. "Like stories, like the truth," he said. Then the oven dinged again, louder this time, and Josie jumped. Cookies. The moment dissolved into laughter. The past could wait a little longer, but the truth had begun to unfold, letter by letter, name by name. And this time, no one was walking away. After the last word of Claire's letter was read aloud, the room stayed still. Even the ticking of the clock above the stove felt muffled. Maddie folded the paper carefully and returned it to the box, but her fingers lingered on the edge of the envelope like she wasn't quite ready to let go. "I always wondered," she said at last, "if Mom missed someone." She never said anything out loud. But sometimes, she'd hum this one tune when she didn't know we were listening. It sounded sad and kinda hopeful. Elijah smiled faintly. Claire had a habit of writing melodies that felt like they were asking a question. Josie stood and walked over to the upright piano in the corner of the room, the same one Elijah had helped move in 2 months ago. The one with a single chipped key and Claire's old music book stacked neatly on top. She flipped through a well-worn notebook until she found a penciled line of music almost faded. "Was it this?" she asked. Elijah's breath caught. It was a 4-bar melody, one he had written once on a napkin in the middle of a thunderstorm when he and Claire were waiting out the rain under a leaky canopy in Berlin. She had called it the Ghost Note song because it was unfinished and always would be. "I didn't think she kept that," he said, coming to stand behind her. "She did," Josie said. "She wrote lyrics under it." Elijah leaned in. The words were scrawled between the staves in Claire's unmistakable cursive. "If I fall into the quiet, will you still find the song?" He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I never finished the melody." "Maybe you don't have to," Maddie said from the table. "Maybe we can." That struck him so deeply he had to sit down again. The oven dinged once more. Josie, always the first to react when baked goods were involved, darted to retrieve the tray. She placed it on the stovetop and grabbed a spatula, dishing out lopsided ginger cookies with the enthusiasm of someone saving the world one bite at a time. "Hot," she warned, passing one to each of them. Maddie sat cross-legged in her chair, nibbling an edge. Nina, quiet, as always, suddenly asked if you had known, back then, about us. "What would you have done?" Elijah didn't answer immediately. He looked at all three girls the way Maddie always asked first, and thought later the way Nina asked without blinking, the way Josie always remembered the smallest things. "I would have come," he said finally, "as fast as I could." Nina gave a single nod, like that was enough. The kettle whistled shrill and sharp. Elijah stood to turn it off, but as he passed behind the girls, he reached out without thinking and gently rested a hand on each of their shoulders. No one pulled away. The moment was soft, almost nothing. But it felt like music. The music box sat on the windowsill again. Sunlight struck the golden rose etched on its lid, casting delicate flickers across the wall. The girls had started winding it each morning just once, letting the slow tune play as they got ready for school. Elijah never asked them to. They just did. It was a quiet Friday in late spring, and the scent of lilacs had crept in through the cracked window. Claire's old radio hummed softly in the background, tuned to some jazz station out of Providence. In the kitchen, Elijah stirred pancake batter while Josie measured strawberries into a bowl. "We're bringing him today," Maddie announced from the hallway. Nina looked up from tying her shoes. "To the concert?" "Yes," Maddie said. "He's part of it." "Is he ready?" Josie asked. Elijah glanced up from the stove. "He can hear you, you know." Maddie grinned. "Then answer." Elijah wiped his hands on a towel. "Depends. Am I being kidnapped by 3 tyrants in ballet flats or invited as a guest of honor?" "Bit of both," Nina said dryly. They all laughed. The sound was effortless now, no longer hesitant, no longer testing. That afternoon they rode the bus into town together. The school's spring concert was held in the small auditorium of Oakwood Elementary, where folding chairs creaked and the lighting flickered if the stage curtain was pulled too quickly. Parents juggled programs and sippy cups, and teachers buzzed between rows herding last-minute performers. Elijah hadn't sat in a school concert since Claire had pulled him into one back in college. He had performed a folk duet with her in a room barely lit by candles. He hadn't expected the memories to return with such clarity. Now seated between Nina and Josie, he scanned the program. There it was, original composition, Maddie, Nina, and Josie Walker. He froze. Walker. He hadn't known. Nina noticed first. "We asked to change our name," she said casually. "Principal said it was fine if Charlotte signed off." She did. "You're okay with that?" Josie asked. Elijah didn't speak. He just reached across their knees and gently squeezed all 3 of their hands at once. When their turn came, they stepped onto the stage, 3 girls in matching pale blue dresses holding their instruments like they were holding their mother's hands. Maddie took the mic. Josie seated herself at the piano, and Nina adjusted the shoulder strap of her tiny violin. "This piece is called If I Fall Into the Quiet," Maddie said. "It's based on a melody our mom wrote and a memory our dad kept." The auditorium went completely still. Then the music began, soft piano first, familiar, but different, the ghost note tune reimagined in full. Then the violin entered light and haunting. Then Maddie on cello bowed a deep grounding note that resonated through every wall. Elijah sat frozen, one hand pressed to his lips. It was Claire's song, but it was theirs now too. After the performance, there were flowers, applause, tears from strangers, and congratulations from parents who had no idea the full story behind the song. But Elijah barely heard any of it. He was still in the echo of the music. Later, as they sat together under the big oak tree behind the school, the same one that had stood watch over Claire's funeral, Josie pulled out something wrapped in a cloth napkin. The music box. "We want to keep it at your place now," she said. Elijah blinked. "You sure?" Maddie nodded. "It started everything," Nina added. "And we don't need to search anymore." He didn't know what to say. But maybe he didn't need to. That night, as they gathered at Elijah's home for movie night popcorn pajamas and mismatched socks, he noticed the way their things had quietly taken up space: books on the shelf, a drawing taped to the fridge, 3 toothbrushes in the holder by the sink. They hadn't just invited him in. They had moved in around him. The music box sat on the mantel now. It didn't play often, but it didn't need to. It had done its job. And sometimes on quiet nights when the lights were low and the world was still, Elijah would lift the lid, let the melody play, and whisper softly to the room full of sleeping daughters, "I found the song." This is a story about lost discovery and the quiet kind of love that shows up and stays. Sometimes healing doesn't come from the answers we expect, but from the people willing to hold our hand when we ask the hard questions. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you won't miss what's coming next. And if you believe in second chances, in the kind of family that chooses each other, you're in the right place. See you in the next story.